Interestingly, healthcare and social assistance is currently the worst affected industry in this region, followed by, believe it or not, public administration and safety, education and training, the retail trade, manufacturing and construction industry, and the majority of injuries are soft tissue injuries. Now, whilst the number of workplace injuries is continuing to decrease each year, I'm sure you'll agree with me that one injury is one too many, especially if the incident could have been avoided. Hopefully, today's forum will encourage you to take further action to help improve these figures. If we all make a concerted effort together, we influence attitudes and behaviours towards work health and safety and empower changes, because after all, prevention is indeed the best medicine. When you get back to your office or work site after this morning's forum, it would be fantastic if you could help spread the word. Please engage with your colleagues and pass on some of the practical tips and tricks you've learned today. Now let's take a look at what's on the agenda for this morning's Hypothetical Forum. Today we welcome Colin Dean, who will be helping us explore the issue of ageing and the role it plays in work health and safety in our workplaces when a worker becomes injured and needs to return to work. We also welcome an expert panel consisting of a business owner, Lisa Burnell from Ronald Young and Co Builders, a WorkSafe inspector, Paul Kitchener, an occupational therapist, Angela Kerrison-Smith from APM, and myself, I'll be playing the role that I do most days as a GP. You'll also be getting a chance to ask important questions that affect your business every day. So please don't be afraid to take part. We want this to be an interactive session, and there's no such thing as a silly question. Before you head off, I would encourage you to take a look around the inaugural WorkSafe Expo up the back there through the curtains. We have a range of interesting exhibitions and demonstrations and lots of practical information to collect and to take back to your workplace. Health and well-being in the workplace is a key focus of many of the presenters here at the Expo. And we all know a healthy workplace is good for business. Research shows us that every dollar invested in workplace health and safety and well-being programs get a return on their investment of between $3 and $6. I wish those sort of returns would come on the stock market. I would be keen for all of you to collate as much information and as many ideas as you can, with the goal of starting a workplace health and well-being program in your own workplace. The benefits of a healthier workforce can range from increased employee engagement and enjoyment to gains in staff retentions, improved efficiency, reduced absenteeism and presenteeism, as well as a reduction in disability claims. The WorkSafer Expo will be running for the rest of the day and all of tomorrow. So I'd like to encourage others to come down and have a look. Why not go back and get some of your workmates and bring them down and have a look at the exhibition. So, thank you all again for your attendance. I hope you all take away some useful tools and ideas as to how to build a safer and healthier workplace here in Tasmania. So, let's get on with it and start off with our hypothetical, and I'll introduce to you our facilitator for today, Alan Jeffrey. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. How's the food? Good? Excellent, excellent. Okay, what we would like this to feel like is a very informal discussion that's taking place that you're witnessing and can participate in. What we will do is that if there is a question that's relevant to what we're talking about at the particular stage of the hypothetical, you may ask it. If I move you on, it's only for time reasons, and there will be time at the end of the session to talk individually or to the panel as a whole, okay, to ask those questions. At about the halfway mark, we will take a short stretch activity just to make sure it's not just your minds that might be getting numb, and we might get one of the participants here to lead that stretching exercise. Thank you again for coming. What we have here is an exploration of the issues around injury management, particularly as it relates to ageing. The hypothetical that we'll be presenting is based on real cases, and Colin has experienced himself a similar kind of injury in this particular industry. But hopefully it's one that you can all relate to. As with any hypothetical, we may go down different paths that are worth exploring, and then to cover as many of the interesting activities or the features of that particular injury that will be useful to explore. It's important also to note that our expert panel are here as individuals, not as representatives of any particular organisation. So they'll be giving views based on their personal experience. We think that's important because what we want here is a real practical explanation of their views on any particular aspect to do with this injury management. We're going to explore 4 aspects of the injury. We're going to look first of all at the lead up to the injury. We're going to look at the injury itself as it occurred, the actions and reactions to the industry, particularly in the workplace, and finally the outcome. So that'll be the 4 stages. So let's begin. Is everyone ready? Everyone nice and alert and you're well fed? Yes? Just say yes, yes, yeah, great. Okay. Okay, let's begin. It might be useful to start off with the panel explaining what they see overall as their role in injury management. So perhaps, Paul, if we start with you.
As a WorkSafe inspector, my role is to ensure that workplaces have an appropriate injury management procedure or policy, and I'll work with the employer to ensure safe systems of work and that to ensure the injury is investigated and to ensure any risks that have been identified have been mitigated.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. Angela.
As a rehab provider, our primary role, I guess, is working with the injured person, and it's around helping to empower them to own their own recovery and their own future. We facilitate and coordinate with the key parties, the injured person, the employer, the insurer, the general practitioner or other treaters, and others as necessary. So it might be a host employer, union representative, etc. Our aim is to achieve a safe and sustainable return to work in as timely a manner as possible. It's on-site workplace-based rehab, so we go out to the workplace, we go and have a look in real time. It's not based on knowledge that's garnered over years that isn't specific to the actual role that the person does. We identify barriers and propose or facilitate some solutions to optimise function and independence for the injured person. A lot of what we do is education to a certain degree as well, around some of the key concepts, some of the process issues, some, layman interpretation of some of the medical information to a certain degree. Obviously, we always defer to the specialist, but there are times when the injured person is not understanding things particularly well. Or we would encourage them to discuss those directly with the party involved. So, for example, financial issues with the insurer, specific medical treatment options with doctors, those types of things. We also do specialist assessment of the workplace. We're looking for what available duties might be available, propose modifications to workflow or the environment, or sometimes even worker habits and behaviour as well. And overall, the entire program, we provide close monitoring of the return to work process. We're wanting to identify any issues early to prevent the derailment of a return to work process as much as possible as well.
Right, thanks, Angela. Dr. Robb?
The role of a GP is an interesting one, and I always say it's actually part of a team, and I encourage GPs to look at this as teamwork. Initially, an important role that often is forgotten is that you don't actually have a claim until you've got a completed initial workers' comp certificate. And that is actually administratively one of the things that initiates that particular claim. Doctors aren't particularly good administrators, however, and often don't necessarily carry out the administrative side of things too well. However, they are good at treating and diagnosing, and a workplace injury really is no different to any other injury. Unfortunately, in the mind of a lot of people, however, workers' comp does take on a different role, but it shouldn't. The GP will see the patient, take a history, make a diagnosis, and then have a suggested treatment. And it shouldn't change just because it's workers' comp. The little known or the little remembered fact is that in most cases, time off work's not necessary. In most cases, with slight modification perhaps of duties, in cooperation as part of this team I was talking about, with the workplace, that worker can be kept in the workforce. Because at the back of our mind, we should always remember that the longer a person is away from the workforce, the chances of them returning is diminished. And we know that after a period of 6 to 8 weeks in more serious injuries, the chance of them ever returning to the workplace diminishes rapidly after that period of time. And so the whole goal should be to have the worker return to the workplace as soon as is practical into something meaningful, into duties that are meaningful, with minimum time away from their environment and away from their workmates. I often describe the GP as a bit of a conductor of the orchestra when it comes to health treatment, because our role is not only to do our GP stuff, the diagnosis, and the paperwork, but also, if necessary, to get specialist advice, perhaps do investigations, X-rays, those sorts of things, to try to get this whole process done in a time-efficient manner. What often happens is the treatment gets fragmented, and I make a plea to workers to stay with the one treating doctor. Put their faith in that particular doctor. Usually the best placed person is their own GP, although sometimes that changes slightly. But that's basically the role we undertake. It's not that different to normal general practice, but it has idiosyncrasies.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Dr. Rob. There's a number of issues that I'd like us to explore during this discussion this morning that you've raised, so that's fantastic. Lisa.
As a business owner, we have a responsibility for the work health and safety of our workers, and we also have to work within the legislation to ensure that we act on injuries in the workplace correctly, so we're not prosecuted, but also for the best interest of our staff. So we have the legal obligation to work with our worker to support them in the workplace and work with the healthcare team to ensure that they come back to work as timely and as productively as possible.
Great, okay, thanks Lisa. Okay, let's hear from Colin. Colin, would you like to give us some background leading up to the injury?
Sure. Morning everyone. Hypothetical breakfast always intrigues me. I thought it was quite real and it was very nice. My name's Colin. I'm 58 years old. I've been working as an extended care assistant now in a nursing home for about 8 years. I used to be quite active. I'll be honest, I'm not as active as I was. You can't tell from looking at me, but that's fine. The kids have grown up, and I lost my wife a few years ago, so I'm living on my own now. So I just got out of the habit of getting out and about. So I must admit I have become a bit of a norm. Exercise is not something I enjoy all that much now, Alan.
Well, why is that? Why aren't you doing it?
I think it's just all part of getting old. My knees aren't what they used to be. I get frustrated because I can't physically do the thing. I used to like going jogging, It's like playing tennis. It's just not as easy to do, so I just don't do it, basically. But also, as I say, I'm single now, and I just find that I was never a great cook. So takeaways, I tend to do a lot of takeaways. It's cheap, it's quick, it's easy.
Yep.
So I guess that's, I've put on a bit of weight. It's not that much.
So it sounds like, Colin, what you're doing, your lifestyle has changed over time to one it's a fairly sedentary lifestyle, no exercise, and probably eating the wrong kinds of foods, etc. Does that affect other things to do with work, the actual work performance, your sick leave, things like that?
I can honestly say, until I had this injury, I haven't even had a day. I haven't had a sickie.
Yeah.
In fact, this is the first injury I've had as well.
Right.
But I'm aware that I'm getting old. You know, like you go to the hairdresser and it costs more every year because they include a search fee and all that sort of stuff. But it's just one of those things that that it gets you down, but it doesn't affect your work. And I certainly haven't let it affect my work.
Right.
But at the end of each shift, I come home, I collapse on the couch, I wake up, watch a bit of Vampire Diaries, and then sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that out loud either. I get a takeaway, and you do get into a bit of a rut. That's all. So
yeah, okay. Just the panel is what Colin's describing. Does that ring, for you? Is this typical? Would anyone like to comment on that kind of how familiar that kind of scenario is for you? Yes, go on.
As an employer, definitely we do tend to see staff members that can be couch potatoes, don't have a good diet, don't have regular exercise, and I think workplaces that do have a health and wellbeing program are really good at changing the culture and encouraging employees to have healthy diet, exercise as part of their routine and take responsibility for their health so that they can be fit for work in the best possible shape.
Yeah.
I see these patients every day, like Colin, and it raises an interesting question about the general health of the community over the age of 50, and how much they exercise. How much do we think about that aspect of being fit for work? We all know that we should be doing 40 minutes a day of exercise to about 75% of your maximum cardiorespiratory rate, but do we do it? Not many people do. And so I think that Colin's a pretty average patient that I would see. One comment I would make is that it's encouraging to hear that this is his first sickie, as he described it, first day off because of injury, and I think that's an encouraging. If I was a GP, that'd be an encouraging thing to me.
Yeah, perhaps Angela or Paul. Colin said this is the first time he's had an injury. Is it your experience that older workers tend not to have as many injuries as younger workers? Is that something you can comment on?
I think it actually relates very much to the individual. Age, and I know one of the big things is that age is not necessarily a precursor to injury. It can be worker behaviour. It can be using the equipment that's provided instead of taking shortcuts to do things. It can be lifestyle. It can be things like lack of sleep, lack of exercise, increased rate of smoking, drinking, recreational drugs, not getting sufficient rest time as well. And a sedentary lifestyle absolutely can contribute. So age, obviously, we start to get a little bit less mobile, we start to get a little bit more restricted in our ranges, but not everybody. I think that's the other thing, that it's age is a number, and I think you can see some incredibly much older people than 58, and you can see some not so well people that are much younger as well. So, and Dr. Rob would be able to talk to this as well from the point of view of the statistics with heart disease and obesity and those types of things just in Australia in general.
Yep, okay. Yeah, Paul, did you want to make a comment?
Statistically, before, sort of when I first started with WorkSafe, it used to be new and young workers with the sort of industry group that had more injuries, but apparently now statistics are showing that it's, as it was pointed out to me, my age. So
You're 35, aren't you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, no, sort of guys sort of 45 plus.
Yeah.
People 45 to 55 seems to be the injury range for most of the injuries statistically that we get.
So it's actually moving up. That's interesting.
They appear to be winning over the youth.
But from what... Oh, Angela, yes, please do.
The other thing I think to look at is that the Australian Bureau of Statistics, in their population projections from 2008, for a period from 2006, I think it was, through to 2101, we've had an increase in the average age of workers significantly over the past 10 years. And they say that by 2065, I think it was, or 56, there'll be about a quarter of the Australian population that are over the age of 65.
Wow.
So we are having a shift in our population demographics, and also I think that there's a need in a lot of circumstances, or a desire for people to work to an older age now as well.
So what you're saying, panel, it's quite interesting that it's really that there are lifestyle factors, and there's factors about the ageing population, and obviously there are individual circumstances rather than age per se. I'm just curious, Lisa, from your point of view, you may not know this, but the average age of somebody in the building and construction industry, do you know any idea?
Oh, I can't give you the exact,
No,
but we do have an ageing workforce, and we have had a deficit of young people coming through with the downturn in the industry, and now we're seeing an upturn. We are seeing more younger workers coming into the workplace, but definitely an ageing construction worker as well, which is reflective of Tasmania's demographics.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Lisa. Colin, would you like to go on and tell us more?
Well, yeah, I can tell you that as far as ageing, I'm actually probably the oldest one in our workplace. Most of my colleagues are younger than me. In fact, they call me granddad, and I know that that's not meant to be a hurtful nickname. I think it's just because I've been there for yonks, and you know they like to come to me if they've got a problem. So, but I must admit, although I don't realise I know they're not doing it intentionally or hurtfully. It sort of, again, it adds to the fact that it makes me feel older than what I really should be.
Yeah. Okay.
Not as mentally alert as I used to be, and I'm only saying that because the crosswords in the paper are getting harder.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, but no, well, yeah, that's all I can tell you about that.
Yeah. No, that's great. Okay. To the panel, the good-humoured banter, or good-humoured in inverted commas. When does it become inappropriate or unacceptable? Like Grandad, Paul, you're going to say something.
Yeah, when it's obviously not wanted. When it causes offence, but when it's not wanted. Sometimes it's a bit hard, but you do have to let people know that if you don't like it, I don't like you calling me that. Once you've done that, they really shouldn't be repeating it.
Okay, so it's important that the employee actually lets the person know, or their supervisor or team leader know. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good. Lisa, you want to say something also on that?
Yeah, just from a workplace point of view, workplaces need to be mindful of issues such as bullying and discrimination. So, including the potential for age discrimination. Often banter, if repeated and continued, can become amplified into issues of bullying and age discrimination. So employers have to be mindful of that and have policy and procedures around that, and address it at the earliest as soon as they become aware that it's becoming an issue. Have to have clear reporting processes, a grievance process, and yeah, it's important to train your staff to recognise those potential problems around age discrimination and harassment and bullying in the workplace.
Right. So if it's repeated and it's and the person, it's unacceptable to the person, then it becomes potentially bullying. Yeah. Okay. Dr. Rob, you want to say something?
Yeah, can I just make a comment, both as a GP and as part of the WorkCover board on this particular subject? There's no doubt that there are increasing claims for workplace bullying, and so it's something that employers really can't put under the, can't hide behind and not address. The WorkCover board, in fact, has commissioned some work on bullying in the workplace, and so it's something that we can assist employers with, and I'm sure it's something that will be discussed outside in the expo. And so I'd encourage workplaces that are sort of say, oh, well, this is never going to be a problem with us, to think about it, and as Lisa said, at least have somewhere a policy on this to address it. And as was mentioned, the very first step is for the workers to feel empowered to say, hey, I don't like what you're saying, I don't appreciate it, I don't find it funny.
Yeah.
What do you reckon, Grandad?
Oh.
Dr. Barb. Yeah. No, as I say, these guys, I hear what you're saying about bullying, but I know they're all great blokes, and so they're not doing it intentionally.
Yeah,
It's just because I'm the oldest bloke there, and like I said, they come to me if they've got a problem.
Yeah.
And so I understand why they're doing it, but yeah.
Yeah, so in this case, it's certainly not bullying, though there's the potential in other cases that it could lead on to bullying. And Colin, you also said you hadn't really made it known to them that you didn't like it.
No, it's probably my own fault, you start off, you sort of, whatever. But after a while, you need to say, look, mate, don't call me Grandad.
Yeah. Colin, can you just tell us about what the health and safety practices are like? Actually, just before we do that, would everyone here agree that, the banter, nicknames, and that is part of the Australian workplace culture? Yes? Yeah? Yeah, okay. So it is only... Is that something that helps the team spirit generally? It's just when it's becoming... It's something that's not acceptable to the individual. Is that right? Yeah? No one's game to say. Yes, quite a few nods. Okay.
Nicknames is just part of the Australian culture, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like everyone's got a nickname.
Yes, I can't think what mine is.
We're not going to go there.
Okay. Colin, would you like to talk about the health and safety practices?
Yeah, so where I work, we do have lots of policies and procedures in place. Risk controls, incident reporting, investigation, manual task policies, all that sort of stuff. But I don't think they're communicated very well. So to the rest of a lot of the other guys I work with, I know they take a lot of shortcuts. Mainly because, again, we're under the pump, so they're trying to get the work done.
Yeah.
But also, I do know that there are a lot of guys who maybe don't report little minor incidents that might happen because they've taken a shortcut or they've done the wrong thing.
Right. Okay, so do you feel that same pressure to take shortcuts?
Well, you do. I do, yes. Because, like I said, we are understaffed at the moment. And, you don't want the rest of the guys to do everything, so it is an all-in thing. You do take shortcuts to get the job done. Sometimes you don't have a choice.
Yeah, but what's your responsibility then for health and safety as an employee?
I do have, as an employee,
Yeah.
I know I've got a duty of care to myself first and to my workmates. So, I guess if I see somebody's doing something wrong, I will say, mate, don't do that. Maybe that's why they call me Grandad. So don't do that. Don't.
Yeah. Is there a contradiction? I'm hearing two messages. On one hand, there is, as an employee, Colin's aware of his responsibilities for health and safety, but on the other hand, he's feeling this pressure and maybe at times taking shortcuts. Colin, do you want to talk about that contradiction? Is that...
Well, I think the problem is the pressure is there to make sure that you can be seen to be able to still do your job. That's probably what it is. So maybe you take the shortcuts to make sure you can get all through the whole rounds.
Yeah.
You can get all the beds changed. You can get all that sort of stuff done. So
Yep.
there is that pressure.
Yep.
If that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay. Paul, I'm sure you've got an opinion on this one.
We all take shortcuts at different times. I'm not too proud to admit that I've done it on a number of occasions, and 2 or 3 of those times it's come back and bitten me.
Yeah.
We all have what those moments are that I call those moments where you go, oh, that was close. And then once in a while you'll have one where you don't get the chance to go, oops, because it's a bit close.
So it sounds to me it's a bit like the Russian roulette situation. Yeah? Yep, okay. Does the rest of the panel agree with that? Yeah. Lisa, in your workplace, I've done a lot of work in the building and construction industry. I know that there is that same pressure. Do you want to talk from an employer's perspective about that pressure to take shortcuts?
Yes, definitely as an employer you do try and have everything in place to ensure that everyone's working to a safe standard.
Yep.
I think you can go out onto any building site at any time and you will find things that aren't being done, and yeah, it's very hard to enforce good work health and safety practices at all times, but I think as an employer you do have the responsibility and obligation to ensure that
Yeah.
things are being done
Right. Okay.
to ensure no injuries or worse.
So it's part of your job as an employer and as a manager to ensure that standards are in place and adhered to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Dr. Rob?
Yeah, it's difficult though, isn't it, Alan? Because sometimes, and particularly in say healthcare, situations can arise where you've got no choice but to do something perhaps unsafely, such as if a resident in a nursing home is falling, whilst it may not be the protocol for you as a single person to try to support their weight, normally you'd get two people to assist. You've got no choice in an emergency situation. And I find a lot of injuries do arise out of unexpected workplace situations.
Yes.
And so I think there's the shortcuts, but there's also the unavoidables.
That's a very prophetic statement, because I think we're going to hear about a situation not dissimilar. Yeah, you've read, I think, knowing what Colin's been through, you've probably read exactly the situation he's been through. So what we've got here, we've got a typical workplace. We've got health and safety procedures in practice and policy in practice. As Colin said, they may not have been as communicated as well as they should. We've got an employee who's aware of their role, their responsibilities, their duty of care, and who is quite conscientious at work. But as they've got on, they've got out of the habit of exercising, not eating well, etc. So a fairly typical scenario from what the panel said. Colin, why don't we talk about the day of the accident?
It was a cold morning. No.
Oh dear.
It was a Friday, and I must admit we were a bit short-staffed on that particular day, and I was going flat out trying to cover up for the fact that we were short-staffed. And it's unbelievable. But as Dr. Rob said, I was in the corridor, I was at work, I saw a resident about to fall, and so reflex action. I reached out to stop them.
So Dr. Rob said that there would be a procedure in place, that there's two people for supporting a patient, but is that the case in your instance?
You're right. You're meant to have two people to support a patient, but you don't always walk around in pairs ready to catch people when they fall, sort of thing. And you know, like I've Cert 3 and all that sort of stuff. We do a revision every year, and we all know what the procedures are, but everybody here will agree. If you see someone who's about to fall over, and you don't just let them fall and then pick them up. In fact, some of these people, it's probably easier to try and stop them from falling than try and pick them up, because they're not as little as they used to. No, that's a rude thing to say. But it's a reflex action. It's a human reaction. If you see one's going to fall, you try and stop them, and unfortunately that's what I did.
Does the audience agree with that? Yes? You do the same thing. So in this instance, it was a reflex action, although technically perhaps not the best way of dealing with it. Okay. So, Colin, once you caught them, what happened then?
Well, again, my duty of care to help them and not to let them get hurt. I tried to stop them from falling, and as I did, I've reached out the wrong way, I've twisted, and I felt a twinge in my back. I reported it to the team leader, who told me that I should take it easy for a while, it'll come right.
Take it easy.
You take it easy, it'll come right, because he said that, you know, the same thing has happened to him, and he usually gives it a few days and it comes right. So just take it easy and it'll come right.
Okay.
He said if it gets worse, come and see him later, and we'll file a report.
A panel, is this a reasonable response from the team leader? Paul, do you want to start? Because particularly from a...
No, it's not a reasonable response from the team leader. He should have insisted at the minimum of an incident report being filled out straight away. Yep,
okay. Angela, did you?
Again, it's not an appropriate response based on his experience. Is not the right way to approach something. It's very much about what's going on for the individual.
Yeah. Lisa or Rob?
All backs are not the same, Alan. And if he's got an injured worker, the evidence will show that take it seriously at the beginning, cut it off at the pass rather than have it exacerbated.
Yeah.
I suspect he's a caring boss by the way he said it. You know, I've got a bad back too, mate. It's a common thing. But just to pretend it's like a noise in the car, if you don't think it's there, it's not there. It doesn't work.
You've obviously heard my car recently. Lisa, you're an employer. Is that, is that appropriate? Would you be happy with your team leader saying that?
No, definitely. I think from a business point of view, under the legislation, an incident report should have been done, and also the employee should have gone to a GP and had a consult, knowing that back injuries can resolve spontaneously, but sometimes medical intervention is required. And under the Act, Workers' Comp Act, the claim has to be done by 3 days. So I think having a starting point and having your staff members see a GP in an instance of an injury that could potentially lead to something else is really important.
Okay. So in this case, it was either because of ignorance, because of maybe pressure that the team leader was feeling, or other reasons that this wasn't appropriate.
Yeah, that's right. I think workplaces, and most workplaces, are aware of their obligation and have policy and procedures around incident reporting and workers' comp.
Sure. Okay. So what happened next, Colin?
Well, the pain got worse over the weekend. I rang my team leader on the Monday morning and said, "Look, mate, I don't think I'm going to come in." And because by this stage, it was quite painful. And he said, "It's fine. Look, come into work and come in and see the nurse at work." So I got my daughter to drive me in because I couldn't drive.
You got your daughter to drive you in?
My daughter drove. There's no one where I could drive. I could only just get in the car.
Yeah.
And I got there, and so then the team leader completed a report, an incident report then. And I went to the nurse. She checked me out and said that I should see a doctor. And she made an appointment for me.
Right. Dr. Rob, the fact that Colin's daughter had to drive him in, does that, from a GP's perspective, does that ring alarm bells for you?
Well, it meant that he was struggling, and I suspect a bit of tough love going on here from the employer, I've got to say. I would have thought there wasn't a necessity to come in and see the workplace nurse. I would have thought a referral directly to a GP would have been a better idea.
Yep, okay. So the fact that there was an RN on site, still go to the GP?
I'm all for staff, trained staff being on site, particularly in big companies. I think it's an excellent idea. But I think the time had passed with this one where he was at home, he couldn't move effectively. I think it's more appropriate that he go to his GP and start the treatment.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's continue. Colin?
Yeah, right.
What did the GP say?
Well, the GP looked at me, gave me a medical certificate for 2 days sick leave, and then gave me a certificate for capacity advising light duties, which I don't know what you can do in my place, but that's what he gave me. I went back, the HR phoned me about the details of the accident report. They asked me whether they thought my age was something to do with it, whether my capability to work had an impact. And to be honest, I started to feel quite apprehensive about the whole thing, whether they were taking it seriously or I don't know.
We'd have HR people here present, is that right? Yes? Is that, I know Bill Fitzgerald's there, he's an old HR person. Is this line of questioning appropriate from HR's perspective? Could somebody in the audience comment? Have we got a roving microphone here? Bill, do you want to comment on that, or we'll just get a microphone to you, Bill. When I said an old HR person, by the way, that wasn't banter. That was fact.
I was a bit worried about that, Alan. Yes, I operate in the mining sector, and we have this sort of scenario appear quite frequently, and I think that sort of delving questioning, intrusive questioning is inappropriate in those circumstances, Alan.
Right, okay. Does the panel agree with that? Colin, that's not a line of questioning you'd pursue?
Exactly.
No? Okay, yeah.
So you might think it, but you're not going to ask that question. There might be something an employer or an HR agent's thinking, but they certainly wouldn't be asking those questions. You wouldn't think it would be appropriate for them to be asking those.
Yep, okay. Thanks, Paul. Okay. So, with the team, Colin, how did the team react to this? Because you do work in a team. You mentioned they're all younger than you.
They're all younger than me, yeah. And I returned to work. I don't think the light duties bit was really taken seriously, especially by the team leader. I felt like I was letting the team down, to be honest, because I just couldn't do what I would normally be able to do. And I sensed that they were treating me differently. Now, again, there was no one particular incident or nothing was said, but it's just the little things, you know, like, I don't know, you go to the morning tea room and there's a slice of cake on a plate in the fridge and you realise they've had a birthday, but they just didn't tell you.
Yep.
You know, like, so it's not like they weren't deliberately attacking you for being a whinger or a bludger or whatever, but you just felt like they felt that way.
Right. Can I be provocative here, Colin? Do you think it was all in your mind, that, in hindsight?
Well, I don't know, by this stage I'm starting to feel a bit like it was. Maybe it was. Maybe I am being a bludger, maybe I am being a whinger. I mean, like I said, this is the first time I've ever had this sort of injury, and so maybe other people have had these sort of injuries and just got on with it.
Yeah.
But there's just no way, I couldn't have done it. I couldn't.
Okay. Panel, would you like to comment on the team's reactions to Colin in this situation? Is this something that can occur, particularly, you know, when the injury is not something that's easily seen? Yeah, Lisa, you want to say something?
I was just going to say, with the modified duties, I think it's always really important as an employer to be on the front foot and have meaningful modified duties for different roles that can be easily prepared for a staff member who is injured.
Yep.
I think it's really important that they don't just feel they're sitting in a chair somewhere doing meaningless work.
Yes.
I think it's really important to ensure that the injured worker is part of the team.
Yep.
And that they're supported sensitively and confidentially as well,
Yes.
to the best of the ability, and really make sure that they're part of the team. They're psychologically.
Okay, so the psychological thing can actually be aggravated because Colin may feel that the light duties or modified duties aren't meaningful and therefore aren't, you know, maybe the whole thing isn't taken seriously and may interpret some of the reactions. Dr. Rob?
This is where I think the employer has a big role, because often the attitude of other workers to someone that's injured or on light duties reflects the boss's attitude to someone who's sick or on light duties.
Ah, so it's a workplace culture thing.
So we start talking about workplace cultures, and there's no doubt that if the boss has the appropriate approach, that you're much more likely that you're not going to have this type of ridiculing or suggestion that they're swinging the leg.
Right. Paul, has that been your experience about the cultural aspect?
It can be. It's not always the case, but yeah, it certainly can be. There's certainly instances in my prior life, prior to working with WorkSafe, where I worked in organisations where they did sort of tend to think if you had an injury that you were a bit of a whinger or a bludger, and yeah, you'd just go away if they ignored it. So yes, it does happen.
Right, okay. So Angela, I want to hear from you, but I'm also curious, I don't think I've heard Colin mention a rehab provider at this stage, but you may want to comment on that. But before we do you want to comment on what he's just described?
More just along the lines, I think, of in today's workplaces, there's often times where the situation's understaffed. Colin's already talked about on the day that the incident occurred, they were short-staffed. So there's already a pressure that exists in a lot of workplaces already to then have a worker who's not, in the eyes of their teammates, pulling their weight, can compound the situation as well. So they sometimes workers don't have a good understanding of things, and certainly sometimes what we might do is talk to the worker about appropriate disclosure of what's happened to them so that their colleagues can have a greater understanding.
Right.
Sometimes it's along the lines of, so we're talking about appropriate or suitable duties. I like to call them transitional. So it's very clear that it's a duty that's in place for a finite period of time or for a short period of time to transition back to normal duties. So the approach that you take within the workplace can have a huge impact on how well somebody's accepted or treated within the workplace as well.
Okay. Good. All right then. What it appears is we've got a number of issues that are emerging, and one of the things, obviously, there's the incident itself and what's happened to Colin, but also we've got the reaction and the culture of the workplace that could be having an impact. Colin, I mentioned about the workplace provider. Did you actually see somebody?
Yeah. What happened with the light duties, like I said, I got a certificate for light duties, and so my boss said, okay, well, just sit at the desk and do some admin work. So it didn't involve any lifting. So I guess he thought he was doing the right thing. But sitting in that chair all day, and it wasn't a real good, comfortable chair, my back got worse.
Yeah.
And again, because I didn't want to be seen to be a whinger, and because the place was already understaffed, I just thought, put up with it. It got worse. And eventually, I informed my team leader, and they got a workplace rehabilitation provider to come in and have a look.
And what did they do, an assessment?
They did an assessment of what my work was and what I was doing in relation to my injury, and the fact that it wasn't helping.
Yes. Okay. Angela, Colin mentioned that sitting it can aggravate his back, and sitting's probably long periods of time is not a good idea. Do you have any advice for the audience?
Absolutely. So I think let's take the opportunity to have a bit of a pause break and stand. We've been sitting for a period of time. And we're going to do just a couple of stretches.
Yes.
So get you all to stand up. If you imagine there's a string on the top of your head pulling your spine directly up towards the ceiling, so you need to stand nice and tall. Don't lift your chin. It's not about lifting your chin. It's a string from the top, just elongating your spine. Take a deep breath. Just relax down. The other thing we're going to do is just put your feet around about shoulder width apart. And slowly slide your hand down one leg. Just come back to the centre again.
Your own leg.
The other direction.
We'll have another claim.
Good. So sitting, we're in a constant flex position. We get up in the morning, we maybe sit to have breakfast at home, we may just jump in a car, we're sitting for however long it is it takes you to get to work. Often we'll try and park as close as we can to the office, so again, we've got a short distance of exercise or movement. We get to an office, we sit in a chair. We're then dictated to by the speed of our computer, we're dictated to by the number of telephone calls that we receive, those types of things. We finish work for the day, we're rushing around doing things, we get back in the car, we go home. Some people do some exercise. I think that there's a large proportion of people who don't, unfortunately, nowadays. And then we sit on the couch like couch potatoes. So we're in a constant flex position most of the day. So what we're actually going to do is the opposite. We're going to do a slight extension of the spine and just slowly back up to upright. And if you place your hands just across your chest, keep your feet and your hips pointing forward, just turn your body slightly. And again, come back to the centre, back to the other direction. Good. Now, all of these movements are sort of, I guess, small range. You can extend a lot of these by when you're sliding your hand down your leg, by taking your opposite hand up and over your head.
Reminds me of my footy
Back
days.
the other direction. Yeah, that's right. So you can see that just takes an extension. So most of the stretches or movement that you can do in your body, you can do a gentle movement, so they're suitable for the majority of people. And then there's other movements that you can do to extend that movement as well. One of the other most important things is use the stairs. Make sure you get off the bus 2-3 stops early, walk that little bit of extra distance. Don't sit at your desk through lunch, hop up, move around. Have walking meetings if you don't actually need to look at a screen. Ask somebody to go for a walk around the block with you to have that meeting that you would normally sit somewhere else. Or even a standing meeting is a good idea as well. So,
Yep.
okay, hopefully that's got
Yep.
things moving a bit.
Okay, the blood's circulating.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
What about standing desks?
Yep. I think that there's a lot of research looking at things such as standing workstations nowadays for circulation, for digestion, for those types of things as well. I think a lot of these things have their place. You can equally stand badly as well as sit in a $3,000 ergonomic chair badly. So a lot of it's around educating the people how to use it appropriately, how to set the heights appropriately, how to make sure that they're not locking out their hips and their knees and sitting on their facet joints in their spine. So any movement that you can get into a workday, particularly if you're in a sedentary role, is valuable. So I think that the advantage of having a computer-based chair is the fact you've got some support you can rest your back into if it's positioned appropriately for you, but equally standing up and for short periods of time intermittently throughout the day is a valuable thing to be able to do as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Angela. One of the things I find interesting is that I've been at standing meetings. They never seem to take as long as sitting meetings, so it's probably more efficient as well, which is a good thing. Paul, from what you mentioned right at the start, that part of your role is to administer the legislation and make sure it's adhered to. What are the legal obligations from what you've heard so far in Colin's incident?
In relation to once there's been an injury and it's been documented and there's been a return to work coordinator appointed and then a return to work plan put in place, the employer is then obligated to have that plan and follow what that plan says.
Right.
Work with the worker if that plan's not working, and then go back and get the rehab coordinator to come back in and work with them again to review that plan, and
yes,
again they've got an obligation then to follow it.
Yeah, okay. So Angela, at what point should a return to work plan be prepared?
Legally, it has to be done once an injured worker is likely to be unfit for or incapacitated for 5 days.
Right.
And it's a more, I guess, a brief plan with respect to the medical certification, the duties that the person would normally be doing, and what they're actually able to do under their current certification. Maybe some of the other environmental issues or supervision issues within the workplace as well. And it's a plan that all key parties sign and agree to, so that it stipulates essentially what that person will be doing day to day in the workplace.
Yep, okay, good. Thank you. Lisa, one of the things that you've mentioned and others is about modified duties, or light duties as Colin called them. From a practical sense, how difficult is it for an employer to come up with meaningful work, from your experience?
Oh, definitely can be difficult to do that, especially in our industry, in the construction industry.
Yep.
An on-site worker coming into an office and doing admin work can be quite difficult. I think that's where it's important to consult with the worker and involve them, but also be able to have that communication with between the worker and the GP if that's required.
Yes.
Yeah, so it can be difficult, but we have that obligation, so...
So to think creatively and come up with something that's worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There's always things that can be done.
Yep. Good. Okay. Dr. Rob's biting at the bit there. He wants to say something.
Well, it's something that I can hear all the employers in the audience going, yeah, right, the GP talking to the workplace. But it is something that we encourage GPs to do and employers to do, because communication is a two-way process. Now, I know people will say you can't get through to the doctor, and I accept that can be very challenging at times. A little tip that I'd suggest is that if you can't get put through to the doctor, because don't forget they're usually with another patient, and anybody who's been interrupted while they're trying to talk to the doctor by telephone calls will know just how irritating that can be. Please leave a message for the doctor, though, to contact the workplace about worker X. And, you know, courtesy, I hope, will prevail, and whilst it might be at the end of the day, so leave a mobile if you've gone home at 5 o'clock, because we usually don't go home before 5 o'clock. Leave a mobile so that you can actually communicate with the doctor, because that's where you can really get a better idea, and it assists the doctor, for heaven's sake. I mean, you know, what it does is it actually gives the doctor a better idea as to what they can do, and what Lisa said is exactly right. In some industries, it's very difficult to find meaningful work. Yes. But when I was in the military, we used to get the sick and injured to paint rocks that lined the driveway. The rock painters, we used to call them. But at least it was something that they were staying engaged in the workforce.
Yeah. One of the things that I've heard is that if an employer can develop a relationship with a GP, that's helpful for everybody. Did you want to comment on that also at this point, Dr. Robert? How do you encourage that there's that the employer gets a good relationship with AGP?
The ideal, of course, is that there's a GP who gets to know the workplace, gets to know the various types of duties that are available in the workplace, gets to understand what individual workers do, and I've had some personal experience with this, and it's much easier to actually see what it means when you say you're a fish boner than just to know what a fish boner is. For your information, they're the ones with the pliers in salmon industry take out the bones out of fish slabs. Now you can imagine the sort of injuries that they're going to get, but just to hear the word "I'm a fish deboner," what does that mean? So if preferably with a GP who's close by, location-wise, establish a relationship, invite the GP round to the workplace, get them to come along and become engaged. I've never met an insurer who has refused to pay for a GP to come to the workplace to have a case discussion. It's a very productive way of doing work, and if you give them enough notice, I'd like to think that the general practitioner will respond. Some won't, and if you don't, if that's the case, then maybe you need to be looking for another GP to be involved with the workplace.
So there are GPs who are prepared to do that, obviously, from what you're saying.
There are, and it's about communication, and it's about respectful sort of conversation with them, and appreciating the fact that if a GP is out of his surgery or her surgery, their earning capacity goes down. So make it at a time that suits, and if it's about a specific case, then a payment is totally appropriate.
Yeah, Lisa, as an employer, would you like to comment on that?
Well, for our business, I definitely have had communication with GPs, and in a prior position where I was a nursing unit manager, I've actually met with the neuro specialist with the staff member to actually facilitate the staff member coming back to work, but also to ensure that we could provide for a safe workplace. So knowing exactly what the staff members could do, it was really important. So we met with the neurosurgeon and the staff member to have a return to work plan in place.
Good, okay. How many people here have developed relationships with GPs? Just hands up. Yeah, a few. Oh, that's great. Excellent. Okay, so it is possible. Angela, I want to ask you a question, and there's been a bit of discussion about the return to work, and Rob said in his opening statements about the importance of return to work. Why? Why is it so important? Wouldn't it be just as useful for the person to stay at home, rest, fully recover, and then come back to work?
I don't agree. I think that it's largely around a maintenance of a routine, somebody getting up, washed, dressed, having a purpose to their day, going through that same machinations in the morning to get moving, whether it's to do that to go to the gym or whether it's to do that to go to see a psychologist or whatever it is. But it's keeping those routines happening. It's a connectedness to the workplace as well.
Yes.
So to the workplace and also their colleagues, their teammates. So I think in Colin's case, it's probably a little bit more important as well. He talked about being single now. He talked about that he goes to work, he comes home, he crashes, he gets up, goes back to work again. So he's I'm putting words in your mouth, Colin, but that limited family support or that limited social activity can start having secondary psychological issues for people that are in isolation at home.
Interesting.
It allows the person to remain a team player as well, so to understand what's going on in the workplace events. So Colin talked about the cake in the fridge that he wasn't invited to, those kinds of things, and some of the decisions for the workplace as well. So it might be where the injury that's occurred because a policy or process wasn't as good as it could have been, and his involvement in how to offer solutions or changes to things could be invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing again is that if you can do trialling of duties on site, again there's that connectedness. It's the evidence to the team players, to the employer, that he's keen, that he wants to be there, he wants to do his job, he wants to get better. So there's a lot of other benefits. And I think the other thing is purely we're all sitting in this room, we all have involvement in a work environment in some way, shape or form. It gives us purpose to every day, it gives us an identity. It helps us maintain a healthy mind from the point of view of feeling that you've got a purpose to every day.
Yeah, it's interesting. What it sounded to me like, Colin's world was already contracting, and the injury is potentially contracting further, potentially, depending on the way it's managed. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Colin, you've been having it easy for a little while. We probably should get you talking.
I'm sitting right here.
I hope you're learning something and writing notes. Okay. So, Colin, let's talk about what happened next, and particularly the reactions and the ongoing issues.
Actually, what I did learn with all that stretching, I think Angela would be really good at the Macarena.
Yes.
Okay, I went back to the doctor. Had another doctor's appointment. They reviewed my condition, and she told me, or I told her that I was starting to get down about the whole thing because it was taking so long, and because it was taking so long to find duties that I could do, and maybe that was because of my age. Maybe again the age factor was starting to play in there. She suggested I see a psychologist about it.
How do you feel about that, Colin?
Well, it's not. I felt old and fat and in pain anyway, and now I'm silly. It's what I felt. So I don't know. I didn't take it too well, I must admit.
Yes.
Because I didn't think there was anything wrong with me mentally, but she was implying there was.
Can I just interrupt there? Because again, I'd be interested. Maybe Angela or Dr. Rob might want to comment. This kind of reaction is that fairly common? You know, that if you suggest a psychologist, or is it the way that's introduced that's important?
It's a challenging thing to suggest to a person, particularly someone such as Colin who doesn't get sick.
Yeah.
First time injury, and then to be saying it's in my mind is the way that they will often perceive it, rather than the fact that understandably, because this injury is going on and he's not used to it, it is starting to get to him psychologically, and we've already discussed the effects that being off work can have on someone, particularly an older person, where a large part of their life is their workplace, is their job.
Yes.
It's where they rely on on a certain amount of socialisation, where they see people they like often, where they have a bit of fun. And often people at this age the kids have left home, they may not have a spouse, or they may not be interacting too well with their spouse at home. They often look forward to going to work, and to have that ripped away can often have a really quite marked psychological effect.
Yes, okay. Angela, did you want to comment also?
I think the other thing there is that the term psychological can have quite significant impact on an individual, and I agree with Dr. Rob that it can be seen that it's not in my head and it's real. It's an emotional response to something, and that's normal. And we will often see when people are out of work for an extended period of time that there are the secondary emotional or the well-being impacts that impact on an individual as well. It's very, very common to see that in clients. Very common to see that the wheels have fallen off, they're not quite sure how to get back on track, they feel a bit like a hamster in the process as well. They're within a legislative scheme that they don't fully understand. They're having to make appointments and do things and be places and sign documents, and it just becomes overwhelming for people. So a lot of it is around helping them understand the process, helping them take control again. Because I think that's the other thing that people often find is they're not in control of their own lives. And or their future or their work, those types of things. So it can have a big impact.
Yes.
I was thinking about this the other day, Alan, when I was watching the grand final, and we've all got used to the fact these days that elite sport has sports psychologists as part of the team.
Yes.
They play a major factor in all Olympic campaigns and all elite athletes. That even sometimes at very minor levels will have access to a sports psychologist. So why not a work psychologist? Why not someone who specialises in that area?
Yeah, that makes good sense. And I think you're quite right. I think it's becoming more acceptable, particularly as Angela said, if it's communicated in the right way and obviously managed in the right way, that can be a plus. Okay, so Colin, please continue.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've both sort of hit the nail on the head. Like, as I said, I lost my wife a couple of years ago and the kids have moved out. So, like, the workplace they're my family now. And so it was getting me down to the fact that I couldn't get back to work. We couldn't find something that I could do to keep me there. And I actually had a friend who suggested I go and see WorkSafe because they could assist with, well, they could come into the workplace and look at what I do and maybe have a chat with the employer and find something that was something that I could do, bearing in mind that they had safe working procedures and things in place.
How did they react to that?
Well, the employer was a bit annoyed to start with because I hadn't told them, A, that I was having these problems and these issues with, you know, thinking about the way I was, but also the fact that I'd been off to see WorkSafe. So, but, you know, eventually they came round and saw that it was a good thing, and they were able to work with them and actually find some things that I could do. They come up with some really good suggestions, and so I was able to find some duties I could do, which meant I could stay at work.
Yeah, Paul, would you like to comment on that, on workplace, WorkSafe rather getting involved, or an inspector getting involved?
In an ideal world, they would discuss with their employer first. That would be in an ideal world. Sometimes it's very hard for them to do that. There is no issue with them calling us and having a discussion, and if it's seen warranted, getting an inspector to come out and talk to the employer. But we've got other strings to our bow as well. So we do have an advisory service, which is something that the employer needs to invite into their workplace because they don't have any access powers.
Yes. Can I just ask, who's used the advisory service? Hands up. Anyone used it? Yeah, only a few people. So that's a relatively new service, is it, Paul?
No, it's been, we've had an advisory service probably nearly 9-10 years.
Oh, right, okay.
So we've also got health and wellbeing advisors as well that work within the advisory service. So it's not just health and safety, there's also the health and wellbeing as well.
Good, okay.
It's an underutilised service, actually, Alan, and I'm sure the people who had their hands up will realise how helpful it can be and will have used it more than once. The fact is a lot of people don't know it exists, and it's very helpful.
Is there someone here who's used the advisory service who'd like to comment on how they've found it? Anyone, any brave volunteers out there? Yes, okay, quick to have the microphone taken to there. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Our business did use the advisory service very early on. We purchased the business about 7 or 8 years ago, and we needed some assistance, and the advisory service was absolutely fantastic, and it was free, which was fantastic when you've bought a business. And we've had them back to our business a few times, and the advice they gave us, and still give us, has been terrific. It's helped us develop our policies and procedures, and they're always on hand. And as I said earlier, it's a free service, so it's just a no-brainer as far as we're concerned. It's helped us set up our safety management system and everything like that.
Okay, thanks very much. So there's an endorsement of that. Okay, so WorkSafe came out, an inspector came out, and it sounds like the inspector in that case, Paul, we might want to comment, acted as a de facto advisor anyway.
That is pretty much 90% of my role as an inspector, is that I go out and talk to people, and I'm more of an educator than a policeman with a big stick. So it's go out, talk to people, come up with a solution. Sometimes it's just a case of getting the two people in the same room to sit down and have a discussion with each other. Sometimes workers find it a bit hard to talk to their employer, so it's nice to have someone in the middle that they see as a bit of a friend on their side, but we're really more of a mediator in between the two. It's discussing what needs to happen and how we can get to where we should be.
Right. So, Paul, in this case, the fact that Colin was finding it difficult, with his team leader, then that it would probably be very appropriate for him to make that choice. Yeah.
As I said, in an ideal world, he probably should have discussed it with his team leader, but if he was finding that difficult too, and there wasn't the opportunity to go above the team leader and talk to someone else, then yes, it's entirely appropriate.
Would there have been grounds to take action on the employer in this, from what you've heard so far? I know there'd be other things you'd have to look at, but just from what you've heard.
Yes, there would be.
Yeah.
But again, that's not normally the approach that would be taken.
Right.
It's not the approach that we take when we go into any workplace following any type of incident, whether it be to do with workers' rehab and comp or work health and safety.
Yep.
That's not the initial thought that's in our head, that when we go in that someone's in trouble for this. It's let's go in and find out what's happened.
Yep.
And in this case, let's go in and talk about what's happening and what needs to happen.
Right. Okay. So it's more remedial rather than some kind of police role.
It's not the big stick. No.
No. Okay.
Can I just jump in there? Thank you, Mr. Soundman. Can I just jump in there, Alan? Yeah. I don't think my employer wasn't doing anything intentionally. The last thing I want to do is sound like I'm dumping on them. It wasn't their fault. I think it's just that he obviously didn't really know the processes properly. He was just sort of saying, look, you'll be right, you'll be fine, you'll be right. And I lost confidence in him, not because I didn't like him or I didn't think he was intentionally trying to put me down. I just didn't feel he knew the system. And so he was annoyed when I went to WorkSafe. But again, as soon as he realised that they weren't coming in to say, this is what you should have done, this is what you should, they were coming in to say, how can we solve this problem?
Okay.
That's why he went along with it, and it was great, and thankfully it worked out for me. So.
Yeah, okay. Angela, can I just ask you a question? The role of the rehab provider, the issue of the mental state of the person, does that fall within you, or is that something that's largely for the GP to look at?
Absolutely, it does. All rehabilitation providers are allied health professionals. So our approach is very much a biopsychosocial approach to an individual, to the whole person. We don't exist just purely physically or purely emotionally. We are a complex being and we need to be able to address all avenues. We don't treat psychological issues. That's not the role of the rehab provider, but we often have more regular contact than a lot of the other parties with the injured worker, particularly if they're not at work. So we're monitoring, we're maintaining conversations with them where it's appropriate to do so. We attend GP appointments with them, so we're a bit of a conduit for information between the GP, the workplace, and also assisting the injured worker to understand the processes and what's going on. So we often, because we tend to spend a lot of time communicating with them, we get a bit of a vibe or a bit of a feel for them as an individual, and we can pick up on changes or subtle comments that people will make or frustrations that people have. So our job is very much to monitor that closely, to work with the individual, to encourage them, or to ideally look at to see whether they do have some supports from their family or from friends. If they're absent, then we need to look at supporting them in some other way, shape or form, and that might be that we have a chat to the GP about a referral through to a psychologist.
Dr. Rob, do you agree with that response?
Yes, look, I think supporting a worker rather than just having the worker sitting at home is vital. And I mean, if they're sitting at home, they'll probably end up in that font of knowledge, the local pub, where all the other people who are in exactly the same situation and who are the backyard lawyers will be giving them all sorts of advice. And that's when from my experience, a lot of claims tend to go off the rails.
Oh, right. That's interesting. So they're getting advice from their mate over a beer rather than the professionals. Yeah. And
you've got all the yachters. You ought to do this. You ought to do that. Sitting there giving them all sorts of bizarre advice. So important to keep the worker engaged. Important for the boss to ring up and say, "How's it going, Fred?" Something as simple as that can make a huge difference, because I tell you what I hear. What I hear is, I say, so has the workplace been in contact? No, they don't care. They don't give a stuff. This sort of comment is often the case, and yet I know the employer and I know that they do give a stuff. Yeah. Just a simple phone call from someone in the workplace. How's it going?
Yeah. So Angela, would you again agree with that? The fact that the employer demonstrates that they're actually concerned, that can also help with the mental state of the person injured.
Absolutely. And it's not difficult, as Dr. Rob's saying, that essentially it is that phone call, just touching base. And it may be that if a senior person at the business doesn't have the capacity to do that they find out somebody else in a more senior position that can maintain that contact with the worker. So it's identifying the right match. Particularly if there's a relationship breakdown as well. So it's obviously not the case with it could have been with Colin. With WorkSafe going in, it could have caused some ill feeling. But we find that very regularly with psychological claims, that there's a breakdown in a relationship somewhere, and to actually have that worker having to report to that person does no favours to the return to work process. So it's about selecting the correct person. It's about having a person with the skills to be able to do that as well, and the capacity and I think it's an honest and transparent approach to things as well. That it's not a false, it's not a ingenuine approach, because that can often come across very easily to an injured worker as well. So there's absolutely the need to maintain contact from the workplace.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Angela. Okay, Colin. So what we've had a situation where you had not the best lifestyle was happening. You had the injury. The initial way it was handled perhaps wasn't the ideal. Things started to come into play, and one of the things I find interesting, the different experts, if you like, came on board and started to do things, and that seems to me one of the important messages. There's a role for the inspector, there's a role for the rehab, GP, and obviously the employer and the employee, but it's about all the parties working as a team in the issue. Colin, what's happened since then?
I still get a few back problems every now and then, a few twinges, but for the most part, I'm pretty well recovered. I'm back at work. It took me a lot longer to get over the mental side of things, as it were. That sounds terrible when you say it like that, but things are looking pretty good now. With the workplace environment's changed a little bit. There's they've got new training procedures in place now, so things look pretty good. Yeah.
You mentioned before about the communication. Has that improved?
Yeah, definitely. They've, as I say, we've put some new training policies in place, particularly in relation to communication and consultation with staff on aspects of health and safety.
Yeah.
And it's little things like if you're going to have nicknames are fine. Like I said, it's part of the Australian culture, but find a nickname that everybody likes, including the person who's been awarded the nickname, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And the other thing I've learnt is, as you say, there are a lot of experts in this world, but most of them, particularly in this case, know what they're talking about, so you've got to trust what they say and just go with it.
Is that the big lesson for you in this?
It is. Well, the big lesson is don't try and catch big people when they're falling over on your own.
So I'm okay? You're fine?
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. One hand. But in fact, I can't believe you're sitting down for this whole... Oh, you're not? Oh, sorry.
I've never heard that joke before.
No, the big lesson for me is that, you do the training, you learn the procedures, follow the procedures. For example, if you have an injury, report it straight away and insist it be reported straight away. But then, if things do start to go a bit astray, then trust in the experts.
Yeah, okay. So let's hear from the experts. What do you see as the major lessons that can be learned in this? Paul, would you like to comment on it?
I see that the major thing is that sometimes you need an incident or an injury at a workplace to actually facilitate the change.
Oh.
Sometimes you don't realise that it's an issue until there's an issue. I can guarantee you people that have done any risk assessments of their workplace will have, when they had their next incident or near incident, I bet you it was something that you hadn't picked up as a risk. So it's something you hadn't thought of. And that's generally something that I find. And I think that what the employer has done in this case is entirely appropriate. They've put a whole heap of processes and programs in place to ensure that type of thing doesn't happen again, and when it does happen, they follow it through.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Paul. Angela, what would you see as from what you've heard?
Communication.
Sorry, what was that again?
Communication. Collaboration, so very much working as a team, as Dr. Rob was talking about. Early intervention, making sure we're getting in early, making sure that the person's linked in with the correct services as necessary. Remembering that a person is not just an injury site, they have needs and emotions that can also impact on their overall well-being. Maintaining a positive mindset. One of the lovely things about Colin is he's very, very positive, and that's not always common in injured workers. And so look for the possibilities, not just the problems. We need to look to the future. We need to look for what can happen versus dwelling in the past. I think the other thing is that age is not necessarily a barrier to work, but employers do need to look out for the duties that they ask any employee to perform and consider how that can be performed safely. So things like the use of equipment, two-person lifting or two-person tasking, eliminating anything that needs to be moved manually when it doesn't have to be, and considering their workforce demographics, which are things like gender, disability, nationality and age. Different nationalities generally will have different physiques, so sometimes that can impact in a workplace. And look to make workflow changes and improve processes that suit all workers in their industry or in their employ.
Good. Thanks, Angela. Dr. Rob, what lessons do you think of it?
I think, and most of it's already been said, but don't stick your fingers in your ears and pretend it's not happening. Intervene early, have appropriate protocols in place in the workplace. Don't be frightened by a workers' comp claim. Stay close to both the worker and the GP. Communicate, because it is a team. It is part of a team process. If necessary, have team meetings. Have meetings of the rehab providers, the injured worker, the insurer, and the GP. You can have it in the doctor's surgery. There's an item number even for it. So it doesn't have to be necessarily in the workplace. And I guess in summary, remember that the most valuable part of your business are your workers.
Good. Thanks, Dr. Rob. Lisa?
I'd just also like to say that given our ageing workforce and demographic, it's always really good for a workplace to be age prepared. Looking at the job roles and recognising the potential for injury to an older worker and maybe consulting with them about their job roles. That might require some training. It might require, for example, a construction worker gaining more admin skills, so maybe computers and things like that they can be ready to transition into another role. So being able to recognise that on the front foot rather than when an injury's happened is really important. Having a workers' comp injury is onerous on a business as far as the time that it takes for all the documentation and making sure everything's in place. But once there is an injury, you do have an obligation under the legislation. It's better if senior staff manage that and so that things are done correctly. So it's just about, I agree, the communication, consultation and collaboration.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Lisa. The thing for me that comes through quite clearly that in this instant, an example that Colin's outlined is that there's no such thing as it's not about being a bad employer, a bad team, or a bad employee, or dare I say, a bad inspector, or whatever else. It's really about people taking a positive attitude to managing the workplace injury if it occurs, and being aware that it's not just necessarily the injury itself. There are other issues. In this case, there was the ageing factor that came into it. There was also issues to do with the mental. And Colin, one of the things you said was it actually took longer for the mental thing to resolve rather than the physical. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Like it was, once the pain was gone, that was fine. I could get back to work, but there was still that feeling I wasn't quite part of the team again.
So that took longer.
So that took a lot longer to get back into the track. But it's just one of those things. Like I said, nobody was setting out to do anything maliciously, and after a while we all got back to the same old story. And
yes.
I got invited to the birthday parties again. It was great.
Good. Excellent. Thanks. Also, from what you just said, Lisa, it also, the thing that I hadn't occurred to me was that this is actually about running a successful business. It's not just an imposition. Obviously, it's disruptive, but the way it's managed can actually, and I think Dr. Rob said this right at the start about the costs involved, and getting this managed properly and getting the person back to work can save a considerable amount of money for the employer, as well as having obviously benefits for the employee and the team itself. So that certainly has come through. We've probably got time for one question before I thank the panel. Did anyone have a particular question that's relevant to this scenario that they wanted to ask? No, that's okay, that's good. We are just about out of time, so it's probably handy. Yes, Bill, I know you wanted to ask one, but he's not. That's good, thank you. Okay, well, thanks very much to Paul, Angela, Rob, Lisa and Colin. I think we should thank them in the appropriate way. Thank you very much. Thank you also to you for coming along and sharing this experience. What we started out, we wanted you to have a better understanding of the roles that these people play in workplace injury management, and as well as the role that the employer plays in it. So hopefully we've started that, and we've got some things for you to think about as a result of this. I think we should thank WorkSafe for organising this. This doesn't just happen, and I know Stephanie and Brad and Liz and their team, they put a lot of work in getting this together, and I do encourage you to go to other events because there's some fantastic things happening with WorkSafe months. So I think we should thank WorkSafe as well. So thank you very much. So on that note, we'll call a conclusion to this morning's breakfast. I hope you enjoyed the breakfast. I can see there's lots of food still on the tables. I didn't get time to finish mine, so I might be wandering around the tables after the event. So thank you very much. Thank you.